Let's do aquatic biomes. Your chart, your paper looks like this, and you're going to fill it in as we go through the presentation. So let's get started. Aquatic biomes, part 1. Don't forget that you can pause the video at any time. What is a river? What is a stream? So a river is a natural flow of running water that follows a well-defined permanent path, usually within a valley. So it's very technical. A stream is also called a creek. Where we live, we have places like Bouquet Creek that flow into the Santa Clara River. This is a picture I took last summer in New Hampshire of a river. I think I took this from a covered bridge. So a stream or a creek is a smaller flow of water, one that's a little irregular, not necessarily in a valley, and it usually flows faster than a river. You also need to know the definition of riparian, which is a river or a wetlands or river ecosystem. Again, pause as you need to fill in your boxes. What's a lake? What's a pond? A lake is a standing body of water, usually with inputs and outputs of water through rivers and streams. So streams and rivers will flow into it and others will flow out. That's an output. But not every lake is like that. There are a few exceptions like the Dead Sea or the Salton Sea. Those are usually ones with high minerals because since water doesn't leave it, water evaporates, leaving behind salts and other minerals. A lake also has temperature differences with depths, whereas a pond doesn't usually have those temperature differences. This is a picture of a pond I took last summer at Eastern Kentucky University, where I taught AP Science, environmental science teachers for a week. And you can see those look like geese on the pond. This one is a marsh. So a marsh is a wetland, and the definition of a wetland is an area where water saturates the soil, and the marsh is primarily made up of grasses. So we have different types of wetlands. A marsh is a wetland with mostly grasses. Again, pause as you need to. A bog is a wetland primarily of peat and mosses and is acidic. So peat, you'll learn a little bit more in Unit 6, is a precursor to coal. So we take dead, decomposing things, heat and pressure and time turn it into fossil fuels. And one type of fossil fuel is coal, but before it ends up as coal, it's peat. And so there's a lot written, like British literature, where they talk about going out and collecting peat to burn in their stoves for heat. So a wetlands, a bog, and you'll also read the word bog in British literature as well. What influences the global distribution of fish and other living resources in aquatic biomes? So you have salinity, temperature, nutrients, depth, turbidity, which is how cloudy the water is, which is really our suspended solids. And so when we do water quality tests with eco columns or in Unit 8, when we study water pollution, we take readings of salinity and temperature and nutrients in the form of like nitrates. Depth we don't usually do. Some AP environmental science students, if they're out on a pond, might take depth. Turbidity is something we measure as well. And so this bottle here is a sample of a pond that had a ton of algae. It was from a golf course. And so it had an algal bloom, probably because fertilizer ran off from the golf course into the pond and caused an algal bloom. But this has some high turbidity because that algae is also suspended solids. All right. So draw and label. Some versions already have this labeled, but you need to know these layers: the littoral zone, the limnetic zone, the benthic means bottom, so B for bottom, benthic. Sorry, let me go back. And also kind of, you can see plants, 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 and it gets a little bit too deep for light. And so know that these are some of the layers of a lake, a deep river, a pond, a wetlands, those kinds of things. The next type of aquatic biome is an intertidal zone. This is an area where ocean meets land and is often rocky. It is very harsh, so the tides come in and out, and at low tide, so at high, so kind of see the difference here in the color of the rocks. Well, these rocks are a different color because they're wet, so they were underwater earlier in the day, and then the tide went out. So this is low tide. The high tide mark is here. Now, the high tide mark changes depending on the strength of the gravitational pull of the moon. So some tides can be higher than others, but the high tide mark is here, and the low tide mark, you can see the water has receded away from the shore. So at low tide, you're going to get more sunshine, warmer temperatures, more terrestrial predators coming in. The species that live here in these rocks, they're going to have to be adapted for air and water, different warmer temperatures, colder temperatures, and so you're going to have species that need to have high ranges of tolerance depending on how many hours it spends in the sun, how many hours it spends underwater. And also you have wave action. Now this particular tide pool is not very wavy. This is in Maine. There aren't really waves in this inlet, but this one has some more down here. This is the coast of Maine Acadia National Park, where I visited last summer. This one has some more wave action, but not a ton in this picture. But on the coast of California, the waves do pound your intertidal zones, and a lot of other places as well. Coral reefs. So what's special about coral reefs is that coral is actually an animal that's related to a sea anemone. They're in the same family, but they have to live with zooxanthellae, which is a photosynthetic algae. And without the zooxanthellae, the coral can't live, and so it dies. Zooxanthellae is sensitive to temperature and pollution and can leave the coral if it's stressed. And when the zooxanthellae gives the coral its color, and so when the zooxanthellae leaves, it turns white, the corals do, and all you have left is the skeleton because the actual animals die. Coral reefs are extremely important for biodiversity, nurseries for fish, to absorb wave energy, and for tourism revenue. And then also you need to know threats. Sometimes they have to cut through the reef to allow ships to get to shore or to ports. Sewage that contains too many nutrients or bad bacteria. Ocean acidification, sediment runoff, and higher temperatures due to climate change. All these things are important. So remember on these charts, I really concentrate the knowledge as to things that you really need to know. And so make sure that you do write everything down and know everything on this chart. The next ecosystem is the open ocean. It is the largest ecosystem in the world. And when we've learned about productivity, or we'll learn about productivity in Unit 1, productivity is the amount of energy available made by your producers available to consumers. Now, the open ocean has low productivity per area because it doesn't have a lot of nutrients in the open ocean. But because it's so vast, the open ocean is the biggest portion of our planet. Even though it has low productivity per area, so per square kilometer, it has the highest overall when you combine all its square kilometers. And it's really important because phytoplankton in the ocean produce most of the oxygen on Earth. When you hear that trees make oxygen for us to breathe, yeah, they do. But most of our oxygen is plankton. Phytoplankton, which means photosynthesizing plankton. So think a plankton. And no, I'm not talking about plankton on SpongeBob, because the plankton on SpongeBob cartoon is drawn as a copepod, which is a real critter in the ocean, but it's a zooplankton, which eats phytoplankton. So copepods do not photosynthesize. Next one. That's it. I didn't realize we were done with our presentation. So hopefully you got all those entered on your sheet. But wait, we're actually not done. I forgot I had a part 2 because I'm like, that's not the end of our slide presentation. So here's part 2 of what you need to know about aquatic biomes. Here we go. Next ecosystem. I didn't think we were done. I'm like, there's more. Kelp forest. So we have these off the shore of California. It's an area of ocean near the coast made of giant kelp. And when you walk on the beach in Southern California, or Northern California, or even up into Oregon or Washington, you can see it's a brown algae. So it looks brownish green and it's washed up on shore, and you can see this giant kelp. In the kelp forest, the sea otter is a keystone species. It's beneficial because it's shelter and food for a lot of organisms. It also absorbs wave energy, and so you don't have as much wave damage on the coastal areas. And in a lot of places, kelp is a human food source. In fact, you eat seaweed, you just don't know you do. Like, if you buy ice cream at the store, it has seaweed, which helps make it a smoother texture. If you ever see the word carrageen, it's seaweed in a product. What's an estuary? So an estuary is a coastal wetland where a river meets the ocean. You have highly adapted species there because of brackish water. So it's part salty, part fresh water, and it varies. So the closer you are in that estuary to the ocean, it's going to be saltier water, and the further up the river you are, it's going to be fresher water. But also as the tide goes out, it's going to be fresher water. As the tide comes in, you're going to have more salty water. So you're going to have some variations in salinity. Also temperature. Ocean waters cool off our coast. So as the tide comes in to an estuary, it's going to bring cooler water. As the tide goes out, it's going to be warmer water from the river, which is what is written here. So tides are caused by the gravitational pull of the moon. And at high tide, it actually means the moon isn't pulling on that water. So the gravitational pull of the moon actually pulls the water in the ocean toward itself, which actually makes the water recede off of land. So that is low tide. Then the moon moves to a different part of the planet because the moon rotates around the planet. When it moves to a different part of the planet, then there's less gravitational pull of the moon, so the water flows back onto the shore and you have high tide. But that's a little side note about how tides work with the moon. So at high tide, Your temperature is going to decrease because ocean water is colder than river water. Your salinity and dissolved oxygen increase because colder water holds more dissolved oxygen. And then at low tide, you have the opposites. Temperature increases because your river water is warmer, and so you have less ocean water up there. And so you can see here's our estuary, and here's the ocean. So at low tide, the water goes out back to the ocean, and so there's more river water, it's warmer water, less salinity, and less dissolved oxygen. And at high tide, the water flows back up here from the ocean into the estuary. A salt marsh is a type of estuary in temperate latitudes. You have salt-tolerant plants like eelgrass in it, and it has high primary productivity. A salt marsh close to us is a Carpinteria next to the city beach. There is a salt marsh with some walking paths. And if you are able to be there in high tide, you will actually see small leopard sharks and some rays in that salt marsh. A mangrove forest is located in tropical and subtropical latitudes. When I have been to Louisiana in the bayou, I have seen mangroves because it's a subtropical latitude. The roots provide really important habitat for species. The trees have to be salt tolerant because this has brackish water. It has salty and fresh water mixed. The problem right now is that half of all our mangrove forest is destroyed. Much is for in the world, much is for aquaculture, so fish farming. So these are good places they can put nets and pens in to raise fish for consumption. And we'll talk more about fish farming in another unit. Then we have some species here you need to know. So this isn't an ecosystem, but you need to know about seagrass and eelgrass. They're found in estuaries, and something interesting about them is that they're adapted to more salinity than regular plants, but not full salinity. So you're never going to see seagrass or eelgrass in the open ocean or really far off ashore. We can see this sometimes if you're walking along the beach in Southern California, you'll see some grass along the shore. It's seagrass. And if you go right out where the waves are coming in, right off the shore, and if you did a salinity there, it's not full salinity right off the coast because of the mix of fresh water. And so it can live right off the coast in intertidal zones, in estuaries, where it's not full salinity. So the full salinity of the ocean averages 3.5% salt. So it can live, at about 2% salt or less. I don't know the exact number, but it will live really near the coast where you have less salinity. Another interesting thing is that sea otters are also keystone species in eelgrass ecosystems. So they're keystone species in kelp forest, but they're also in eelgrass ecosystems. Estuaries are really important because they're breeding grounds. I've been kayaking in an eelgrass marsh up near Monterey, California, in a place called Elkhorn Slough. And that's where sea otters give birth and have babies. A lot of them do because it's a protected area. And so we kayaked right with, well, of course you have to stay away by law, a certain number of feet away from them. But it was amazing with dozens of mother sea otters with their pups on their bellies and sleeping together. But it's also really important breeding grounds for fish, birds, crustaceans, or things like crabs and lobster. And then commercial fisheries, they depend on estuaries because babies are born in the estuaries and swim out to sea. And then the fishermen can catch and sell them. Another thing that's really important about estuaries, so there's a lot about estuaries because estuaries is a heavily tested topic. So it's very frequent. Wetlands and estuaries, especially wetlands, are very frequent topics. So there's a lot you need to know. And again, estuaries is a type of wetland where rivers meet the oceans, so it has brackish water. But remember, there's wetlands inland that have no access to ocean water, and they're just freshwater wetlands. So estuaries have a large biomass of producers, plants, algae, phytoplankton, super important for productivity. That's why all these birds are here. They're eating the fish that eat the algae, or I don't know what those birds are eating, but it's a huge amount of productivity. Rivers bring with them nutrients, which increases photosynthesis, and because there's high decomposition, there's more nutrients. So lots of productivity. Estuaries also provide a very large amount of ecosystem services. So here's some of the things. Now, ecosystem service is something nature gives to humans for survival or to make money. We benefit from these things. So nature gives to humans. Estuaries build land through sediment transport. So sediments run off. So dirt sediments run off into rivers and get carried downstreams, and they build land in wetland areas. And this land area buffers storms and hurricanes and saves people money from hurricane damage. These estuaries can clean pollution from the river before it enters the ocean. And estuaries are great for tourism. Like I rented kayaks in Elkhorn Slough so I could kayak with the otters and the sea lions and other critters. And so I spent money there as a tourist. And then fisheries can increase their catch and profit. So fish breed, babies grow, then they swim out to sea, and it increases the overall fish numbers. And it has cultural value because all kinds of nature and beautiful nature reduces stress, which actually saves on medical costs. There's some big threats to them as well. Eutrophication from nutrient runoff, deforestation, soil erosion, sediment pollution. Well, wait a second. Don't we want sediments? Yeah, we do. We want sediments to build wetland areas, but too many can cause problems as well. So there needs to be the right amount. And when you cut down trees, those roots don't hold the soil in place. And so that soil all erodes and can really kind of clog up a wetland with too many sediments at once. Also, we drain them and fill them in for agriculture and development, and that's really what's happened to most of them in the United States in the past couple hundred years. If you dam the river upstream, it prevents sediments from actually entering estuaries and nutrients as well. So again, we want this balance of sediments. Any kind of water pollution can cause damage, and then we also take river water and divert it into aqueducts. So for example, the Colorado River flows from Colorado to the ocean between California and Arizona. So it actually flows into the ocean right in the Sea of Cortez, which is between Baja California, Mexico, and mainland Mexico. And so it's on the border there of the United States, Mexico, between California and Arizona. That's where the Colorado River meets the ocean, except it doesn't meet the ocean very often anymore because so much of that river is sent to, that's really where Phoenix gets its drinking water. It's where a lot of Nevada gets its drinking water. It's where Southern California gets its drinking water. So think of like Orange County and San Diego counties, they get their drinking water from the Colorado River Aqueduct. And so sometimes there's no water left for the estuary. And so it's a really degraded estuary from the Colorado River. And now we are done. That is the end.